I didn't say a word. I just bent down, picked up the watch from the floor, and slipped it into my pocket. No one at the table even glanced my way. They were all caught up in laughter over something my daughter-in-law had just said. Something about the new apartment she and my son were planning to rent in the city, floor-to-ceiling windows, a rooftop terrace, a building with a concierge. Who even remembered her name? My son, Marcus, laughed the hardest. He had a way of doing that now, laughing at whatever Jenna found funny, agreeing with whatever Jenna believed, wanting whatever Jenna wanted. I used to know a different version of my son. I wasn't sure where that version had gone. My granddaughter Ava sat beside me. She was 7, with her grandmother's eyes. Dark brown, wide, always studying things as if trying to memorize them. She saw me pick up the watch. She looked at me, then at her plate, and didn't say anything either. Kids that age understand more than adults give them credit for. We'd come to the restaurant to celebrate. Marcus had been promoted to regional director at his firm, a real achievement. I was proud of him, genuinely proud, the kind of pride that sits heavy in your chest and makes you feel like all those years of sacrifice meant something. I'd driven 40 minutes to be there. I'd put on my good jacket, the charcoal one that my late wife, Ruth, always said made me look distinguished. And I'd brought the watch. The watch had belonged to Ruth. She'd passed away 2 years and 3 months before that dinner. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late, which is how it usually goes. We had 18 months between the diagnosis and the morning I sat beside her hospital bed and watched her stop breathing. In those 18 months, she did something I only understood later. She got her affairs in order, not just the legal things, the will, the accounts, but the personal things, the things that mattered more. She'd kept a small cedar box on her nightstand her entire adult life. I'd never opened it without her permission. In her last weeks, when she could still speak clearly, she opened it herself and showed me what was inside. A few folded letters, a photograph of her parents on their wedding day, a thin gold bracelet she'd worn as a child, and the pocket watch. The watch had been her father's, passed down from his father before him. Silver-cased, heavier than you'd expect, with an engraving of a tree on the cover, branches reaching out on one side, roots spreading on the other. Inside the cover, her grandfather had scratched 4 words in uneven letters. Time holds what matters. The mechanism still worked. You could wind it and feel the gears catch, then hear the soft, steady tick, like a small heart deciding to keep going. Ruth held it out to me and said she wanted it to go to Eva. Not now, she said. When Eva is old enough to understand what it means to take care of something. When she's 10, maybe. You'll know when the time is right. I nodded. I closed my hand around the watch and made her a promise. The way you make promises to people who are running out of time. With your whole body, not just your voice. I kept it in the cedar box on my own nightstand after she was gone. I brought it to the dinner because Ava had asked about it on the phone the week before. She'd been at my house for the weekend, as she was most weekends, and she'd seen the box and asked what was inside. I showed her. I let her hold the watch, wind it, listen to the tick. Her face went very still, the way children's faces go when something reaches them at a level they can't name yet. She asked if she could hold it again sometime. I told her absolutely. I told her it would be hers one day. So I brought it to dinner to show her one more time. That was all. I wasn't making a presentation. I just wanted her to have that moment again. I set it on the table after the entree arrived. Eva was sitting close beside me, the adults in that loose, comfortable middle part of a dinner. Wine poured, pressure relaxed. I showed it to her, and she held it with both hands the way she had in my bedroom, carefully, like she already knew it was important. Then Jenna looked over. Jenna had a particular way of looking at things she considered beneath her. Chin up slightly, eyes flat, lips pressed in a thin line that was almost a smile but was actually the opposite. She reached across the table and took the watch out of Eva's hands before Eva could react. Not roughly, but without asking. "What's this?" she said. I told her it had been Ruth's, her grandfather's before that. I told her I'd brought it to show Eva. Jenna turned it over. She looked at the engraving the way you look at something when you've already decided what you think. She set it down on the edge of the table, not back in front of Eva, just down on the tablecloth near the breadbasket. "It's not even real silver," she said. "You can tell by the weight. These old pocket watches are everywhere at estate sales. They're not worth anything." Marcus glanced at me, then looked away. "It was Ruth's," I said again. I heard my own voice, calm. I was surprised by how calm it was. "I know it was Ruth's," Jenna said, picking up her wineglass. "I'm just saying you shouldn't build something up to be more than it is. It sets unrealistic expectations." She looked at Eva. "Grandma had a lot of pretty things, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean they're valuable." Eva looked at the watch on the tablecloth. She didn't reach for it. I picked it up and put it in my jacket pocket. Jenna had already turned back to her conversation. Marcus was nodding at something a colleague across the table was saying. Eva slipped her small hand into mine under the table. I held it, and we sat like that for a while. I thought about Ruth, about promises. I drove home in the dark with the watch in my pocket. I thought about what Jenna had said. Not worth anything. I'd never thought about whether it was worth anything. The question had never occurred to me in 40 years of knowing it existed. But something about the way she said it, so certain, so casually dismissive, made me want to know. The next morning I called a shop, an antiques dealer in the city on Birch Street, decades old, the kind of place with no sign except the address and hours. A friend had mentioned it years ago. I called and a man answered. I described the watch briefly, and he said to come in whenever I liked. I went on a Tuesday. The man's name was Arthur Penning. He was older than me, mid-70s, with a neat white beard and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. The shop smelled like wood polish and old paper. Clocks on every wall, all running, their layered sounds somehow peaceful. He came out from the back, shook my hand and gestured to the counter. I set the watch on the glass. He picked it up without hesitation, turned it over once, then stopped. He pulled out a loupe and looked at the engraving for a long time. Not the tree, but something along the border of the case. Then he opened the cover and looked at the movement. He was quiet so long, I started to wonder if I should say something. "Where did you get this?" he said. I told him. "My wife's family, passed down from her grandfather." He nodded slowly. "Do you know anything about her grandfather? His name? Where he was from?" I knew a little. His name had been William Hargrove. He'd come from Scotland to the United States in the early 1900s, settled in Pennsylvania, worked in manufacturing. Ruth had mentioned him occasionally, always with reverence, but she hadn't known him. He died before she was born. Arthur took a breath. "I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I'd like to look at this more carefully. Can you leave it with me for a few days?" I said I could. I went home and didn't think about it too much. I hadn't brought the watch there to discover it was valuable. I'd brought it because a woman across a dinner table had said, "Not worth anything," in that flat, certain voice, and something in me needed to check. Whatever Arthur found, I would put the watch back in the cedar box, and it would still go to Eva when she was 10. That was still the whole point. The call came 4 days later. Arthur asked if I could come back. "Not over the phone," he said. He would rather show me. I parked on Birch Street on a Thursday afternoon and walked in. Arthur was already at the counter with the watch and several printed pages spread out. Beside him stood a younger man he introduced as a colleague from the university, a horologist. The younger man was trying to appear composed and mostly failing. Arthur laid it out carefully. The watch was made in Edinburgh in 1887 by a maker named John MacGregor and Sons, who had produced only a limited number of pieces before the workshop closed in 1891. Most of the watches had been considered lost. There were 7 known to exist in collections. This made Ruth's grandfather's watch one of 8, possibly the finest surviving example, according to the younger man, because the movement was original and intact, and the case had not been refinished. I was listening, but part of my mind was very quiet, the way it gets when something large is happening, and your body understands before your brain does. Arthur slid one of the printed pages toward me. An auction result from a European house, 3 years prior. One of the 7 known McGregor watches had sold. The number at the bottom had 5 digits before the comma. The market for this category has grown considerably, Arthur said. I've spoken with 2 colleagues. Conservative estimate for this piece based on provenance and condition would be in the range of $60,000 to $80,000, possibly higher at the right auction. I looked at the watch on the counter, the silver case, the tree engraving, the roots and branches. Time holds what matters. Her grandfather had carried it across the Atlantic. I thanked them both. I picked up the watch. I drove home. I sat at the kitchen table for an hour without turning on a light. I wasn't thinking about the money. I was thinking about Ruth, about the cedar box on her nightstand, about the way she'd said, "You'll know when the time is right." I was thinking about a 7-year-old girl sitting at a restaurant table with her hands folded in her lap after someone told her the things she loved were not worth anything. I put the watch back in the cedar box. Then I called my attorney. Ruth had left a will. I knew the contents. I'd been there when she made it. The house was mine during my lifetime, but there were provisions for Eva, specific ones Ruth had thought about carefully, a small trust. Ruth had not been wealthy in the conventional sense, but she had been precise and intentional. I hadn't looked closely at the language around personal property. My attorney, a woman named Patricia who had handled our family matters for 15 years, pulled up the documents. We sat in her office on a Friday morning. Personal property of sentimental value. Ruth had written, including but not limited to items in the cedar nightstand box, to be held in trust for the benefit of Lillian Ava, my granddaughter, until she reaches the age of majority, with my husband acting as trustee and sole determiner of timing and appropriateness of transfer. Patricia looked at me over her glasses. She named the box specifically. She knew what she was doing, I said. She always did. What that language meant practically was that the watch, now understood to be worth somewhere between $60,000 and $80,000, was legally Eva's. Specifically, already Eva's since the day Ruth signed that document. Jenna had held it in her hands at a restaurant table and set it down near the breadbasket and said, "Not worth anything." And it had already belonged to Eva at that moment, protected, documented, untouchable. I asked Patricia about the broader situation, about Marcus and Jenna and the planned move across the country, about Eva being taken states away, about the weekends and phone calls and the way things had been shifting. Patricia listened. Then she told me what my options were as a grandparent. They were not nothing. I want to be honest about what came next, because I think it matters how you do things, not just whether you win or lose. I didn't call Marcus with an ultimatum. I didn't go to Jenna and show her the appraisal like a card I was slamming on the table. I thought about it. I won't pretend I didn't think about the image of her face when she saw the number, that flat certainty crumbling. I thought about it, and I let it go. Because Ruth would not have done it that way. And I had made her a promise. That promise was bigger than any momentary satisfaction. What I did was call Marcus. I asked if we could have lunch, just the 2 of us. He was quiet on the phone in the way he was quiet when he was deciding something. Then he said yes. We met at a diner we used to go to when he was in high school. Same vinyl booths, same pies under glass on the counter. We ordered coffee. He looked at his hands. I looked at him. For a while, neither of us talked about anything important, which was its own kind of talking. Eventually, I told him about the watch. Not about the money first. About Arthur Penning and the shop on Birch Street. About the horologist who couldn't quite hold his composure. About Edinburgh in 1887 and a workshop that closed after 4 years. About a man named William Hargrove who carried something across the Atlantic inside his coat pocket and had no idea what he was carrying. I told Marcus that his grandmother had known about the cedar box her entire life, had kept it on her nightstand for 40 years, and had thought carefully about who it should go to, and how, and when, and why. I told him about the language in the will. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She was going to tell Eva on her 10th birthday." "That was the plan," I said, "give or take." He picked up his coffee cup and set it down without drinking. "Dad," he said, and stopped. I waited. "She said it in front of Eva," he said. "Jenna, about the watch." It wasn't a question. He already knew. He had been at the table. "Eva didn't say much about it," I said. But she understood. He rubbed his face with both hands. The gesture he'd made since he was a teenager when something was sitting on him too heavily. He was 41 years old, and he still made that gesture, and I still recognized it. "She does that," he said quietly, "with things that matter to Eva." He stopped again. I didn't push. I hadn't come there to push. I'd come because he was my son and I missed him, and because I'd learned in 67 years of living and 2 years of grief that the most important things usually can't be forced. "Your mother loved that little girl more than she could express," I said. "She spent the last year of her life making sure Eva would have something real from her, not money, something real. She wanted her to understand where she came from." Marcus's jaw moved. He wasn't going to cry in a diner, and neither was I. But we were both close to something that felt like the edge of a long drop. "I know," he said. "I know she did." We talked for another hour. Not about the move, not about Jenna, not about lawyers or documents or rights. We talked about Ruth, about the things she used to say, about the way she made a house feel like a home that had been standing for centuries, even when we were in a small rental with one bathroom. About Eva at 6 years old, sitting in Ruth's lap while Ruth wound the pocket watch and held it to Eva's ear so she could hear it tick. Marcus drove away. I sat in the parking lot for a while before I started my car. 3 weeks later, he called on a Sunday evening. He said the move was being pushed back indefinitely. He said Eva was asking about me. Could she come over that weekend? He said it in a voice that sounded like something had been settled in him. Not loudly, firmly. I said, "Of course." I said I'd make the chili she liked. I didn't ask what had happened between him and Jenna. That wasn't mine to know. Eva came over on Saturday. She came through the front door the way she always did, fast and certain, like a person who has never questioned whether they were welcome somewhere. She dropped her backpack in the hall and came straight to the kitchen, climbed onto the bar stool at the counter and said, "Grandpa, can I see the watch?" I went to the bedroom. I opened the cedar box. I brought the watch to the kitchen and set it on the counter in front of her. She picked it up with both hands. She opened the cover and looked at the mechanism the way Arthur had shown me, with attention, with patience. She turned it over and looked at the tree engraving, the branches and the roots. She found the words scratched inside and read them aloud slowly, like she was making sure she understood each one. "Time holds what matters." She looked up at me. "What does that mean?" I thought about it for a moment. I thought about Ruth's father's father crossing the Atlantic with this thing in his pocket, not knowing what he was carrying. I thought about Ruth on her nightstand, about a restaurant table and a flat voice saying, "Not worth anything." About Arthur Penning's shop with all those clocks ticking at once, all those different rhythms layered together into something that was somehow peaceful. "It means the things that are really important to you," I said. "Time keeps safe. Even when people don't recognize them. Even when they get set down wrong or set aside or treated carelessly. Time holds on to what matters." Eva considered this with the seriousness she brought to things she sensed were large. "Like Grandma," she said. "Like Grandma," I said. She wound the watch. She held it up to her ear. We both listened to it tick, steady and unhurried, the way it had been ticking for 137 years. Through a workshop in Edinburgh, an ocean crossing, a life in Pennsylvania, a cedar box on a woman's nightstand, a restaurant table, a shop on Birch Street, and all the quiet afternoons in between. She handed it back to me eventually. We made chili. She told me about a book she was reading at school. A chapter book about a girl who discovers a hidden garden and brings it back to life. I stood at the stove and listened to her talk and thought about Ruth, who had always believed in hidden things that were worth saving, who had always known exactly what she was leaving behind, and exactly who she was leaving it for. The watch is still in the cedar box on my nightstand. Eva will be 10 in March. She already knows it will be hers then, and she already understands, in whatever 7-year-old way a person can understand something like this, that her grandmother left it for her specifically, out of everything, because she wanted her to know where she came from and how to hold on to what matters. I think about that sometimes late at night when the house is quiet, about how a woman who knew she was dying spent her remaining time and energy making sure a small silver watch engraved with a tree would find its way to the right hands. She didn't do it for the money. She didn't even know about that. She did it because she understood something that takes some people their whole lives to learn, and that some people never learn at all. That value and worth are not the same thing, and that the most important things are often the ones that look, to a certain kind of eye, like nothing at all. My son called me last week. He sounded more like himself than he had in years. He asked if he could come to the birthday in March, for Eva's 10th. He wanted to be there when she got the watch. I told him I wouldn't have it any other way.